hand it to Dr. Gage to tell us the data story here.
All right, thanks, Luke. So as we said, WestEd is the external evaluator, and I think that's an important caveat. We didn't have any role in the development of the implementation materials. We provided some research insights, some advice, sat on meetings, but didn't influence any of those pieces. And we also did all of our analyses independent. So all these are kind of separate from the implementation to give it, some sense of rigor and independence. Next slide, please. All right. So we did two studies. And what I'm going to first talk about is a qualitative study. We wanted to do some in-depth analysis and really kind of dig into what was the Cal-ISP development and implementation process like, but what was it like for different audiences? And so this study we actually, and what I'm going to report on, are two different audiences that we did some virtual focus groups with. First, we were able to recruit 10 schools that were kind enough to give their time and bring leadership as well as teachers, MTSS team members, school counselors. Each kind of school was a different kind of makeup of who was able to show up to that particular focus group. But 10 sites from across the entire state of California were kind enough to spend an hour with us to go over what it was like doing Cal ISP. Then we had an opportunity where all of the regional trainers across all 11 regions were all going to be in a single meeting. And so we worked with Kirsten and the Cal ISP team to say, could we get all of them together to do focus groups with them and kind of learn about what it was like as regional trainers to do Cal ISP? And so we did, it's three separate focus groups, although it was at the same time. It was just three different rooms with three different facilitators, because otherwise the group would have been too large to do just one focus group. So even though it is really three, it's going to be kind of combined into one. We completed all of the qualitative data collection across all of these individuals, and I don't remember the exact number of individuals right off the top of my head, but each focus group had at minimum 4 people involved. We took all of this, again, we did it all over Zoom. We took the transcriptions, and then we did something called thematic analysis, where we had multiple staff go through and read all the transcripts, and we identified common themes within each of the groups. So the school-based educators and then the regional trainers. And then from those, we identified themes that we think represent overall the experiences of those in each of those groups. Um, and I think it's important that our questions, so one of the things that would really kind of drive a lot of this was the questions we did. We did a standard protocol for both groups. And one of the things we were really interested in was both what were positives or strengths or things that really worked well for them. But we did also ask questions about what were some barriers to success, barriers to succeeding, or some of the challenges that they experienced. And so we were able to identify themes in kind of both those buckets, with most of them being positive, as you'll see. Next slide, please. All right. So for the educators, I'm going to kind of skip over all of the methodology. We do have reports and whatnot, which I think will eventually be publicly available and available on the websites. But for now, and you're welcome to reach out. I'm happy to share details if necessary. But from the educators, so again, we did 10 schools, multiple educators with each focus group. We analyzed all the data together, and we came up with these 5 kind of big themes that ran true across all of them. First, educators reported that doing Cal ISP, receiving the training, going through the process, for them increased their systems level alignment and integration. It was a really common insight from the educators that by kind of bringing together these initiatives and components that oftentimes can be disparate and disconnected, but with a systematic way of bringing them together, really did have that effect from their perspective, which I thought was really, really reinforcing, as that was one of the goals of the project, and the educators independently were reporting that that was the experience they were having. I also felt really, really strongly that the trainings, because the coaching was consistent and it wasn't just a one-off training, but in fact, the Cal ISP team was with them, and the regional trainers were with those schools and kind of supporting them district to school consistently, that it was really building that capacity within the school to be able to do these things on their own, particularly as time went on. The third was a real emphasis that doing this work increased the school's interest and capacity to do data-informed decision making, which was another really, really great positive that came out of these qualitative focus groups. As we know, that is a really, really important part of building your MTSS and building PBIS, as well as bringing these other pieces in. And the final kind of real positive that kind of came out of this was that they felt there was improved collaboration across roles and systems. So what was really interesting and kind of unexpected was that the consistent coaching and developing these relationships between regional trainers, districts, and schools built relationships and more collaboration across those three different levels than was present prior to doing the Cal-ISP. So that was another real positive, that doing the sustained kind of coaching builds those relationships to really create that collaboration. But not everything was great. There were a few challenges. And one of the big challenges, we kind of bucketed it together, was around this implementation and sustainability. Implementation challenges really were around, how do you get that collective buy-in across all of your staff within your building? We want to get everyone on the same page, doing the same practices, using the same language. And we know that can be a challenge. That's true of Cal-ISP, that's true of PBIS, it's true of MTSS, it's true of any sort of initiative, any sort of curriculum and program, but it definitely was true here. So getting that buy-in and then doing it with fidelity, right? We know that's a big, big challenge. About consistency of these practices, building them into your regular routines. So that challenge around implementation, we know, and it takes time to build and become fluent in these practices. The other part, and this was really, really highlighted consistently across all the groups, was concerns about sustainability. There were so many positives, and everyone really was quite positive about the Cal-ISP initiative, all of the things that happen, all of the trainings, all this stuff. And they were like, but what happens when the funding runs out? There was a lot of concern about, how do we know that we're going to be able to continue to do this? Is there going to be additional resources? How can we continue to sustain this? We know this is important. So there was a lot of concern, at least voiced from the educators, about sustainability and supports for longevity and sustainability. All right, now we'll move on to the regional trainers. So again, we did 3 focus groups, but we had all of the regional trainers together in one room. And across those 3 different sessions with everybody, these were the 5 kind of common themes that emerged from this group. First, the regional trainers noted that when working with districts and schools, it was really, really important that the coaching was differentiated for the needs of each individual district or school. In other words, it wasn't a one size fits all. Here's our coaching slides here, or here's our coaching protocol, and here's exactly how we do it with everybody. Even though the core components need to be the same, that everything, we want to make sure they're getting the same content, that there needs to be differentiation based on the unique needs. Remember, we were doing this work in very, very rural parts of California and Northern California, and we were doing this work in very, very urban parts. And each of those have their unique challenges, as we all know. I'm preaching to the choir, that we need to kind of adapt some of the things we're talking about, whether it be culturally sustaining practices, and the other components as SEL. The needs can be different across those things. So making sure differentiate that coaching and support. The other thing they talked about was that systems change, which this really is systems change, right? We know building these systems is difficult. It is systems change. It requires leadership engagement. It's not just oh yeah, it's fine. There was a lot of noting that that leaders, whether it be district leaders or school-based leaders, need to be actively involved in the process for it to really, really be successful. Because if the leaders were not engaged in the work, building towards sustainability was going to be a huge challenge and very unlikely, because we needed that piece. The third kind of theme that kind of emerged from the regional trainers was integrating mental health within MTSS is powerful, and I would say important, but it's extremely complex, right? Creating prevention and intervention around mental health is not simple work, right? There are challenges related to screening and accurate screening. There's challenges related to biases. There's challenges relating to identifying effective interventions. There's challenges related to getting external expertise if necessary. All of these things are really, really complex, and that the regional trainers highlighted the fact that, yes, we know we can do this. We have the tools, as Luke was talking about, but it is complex work, and it's good to acknowledge that it's complex work. Let's see. Number four that was noted by them is the need for consistent messaging and tools across the state. So if you kind of think about this with one and four, four, that the messages need to be the same and the tools need to be consistent and use the same, but how you coach the schools to use them, or some of the examples you give, or some of the supports you give, or how much, that's where you differentiate. But then really, really important. But then five was kind of some of the barriers or challenges they were concerned about. And that what the regional trainers talked about was also sustainability. So that was the one kind of common theme that certainly emerged between both groups independently, was kind of concerns and desires for sustainability of the Cal ISP practices and the coaching. And from the regional trainers, what they noted is they're like, we really want this to be sustainable, but we know it's going to require investment at the state, district, and school levels, and it's going to take some policy alignment. Ah, there's a question in the chat. I want to make sure. So were the themes and educators teams implemented with fidelity? So across the 10 schools that we included, I didn't have the fidelity indicators for them, but that's something we can go back and look at in regards to whether, but we know from records that all of these schools all received the same amount of coaching. But some of the local implementation data and that fidelity data is still kind of emerging as we're going. So I can't say for certain that they were like our exemplars. And in fact, that's probably a good thing in the fact that there was probably quite a bit of heterogeneity across those 10 schools in regards to implementation fidelity. But I don't have the scores right off the top of my head.
And Nick, I'll just jump in quick
Please.
from the boots on the ground. One of the consistent messages that came back to me was that readiness really mattered in terms of getting to fidelity. So our schools that had more PBIS and MTSS infrastructure tended to reach better fidelity levels with this project than not. So that was certainly something that came up.
All right. And then we're just going to highlight just a couple of other important themes that kind of emerged from this work. And that was kind of differences, which most of these make sense between the school-based educators and the regional trainers, right? And the ones that I think are really important, and this is in the report, and I don't need to go through it, but that from each of the group's perspectives, what was the most important levers of change or lever of change to kind of move the needle within the schools? For the school-based folks, they noted it was about building trust with students, embedding social emotional learning and other routines within your typical practice, and that consistent leadership was really, really important. From the regional trainers, it was again that adaptive coaching, that differentiation adapting really, really came up a lot. And interestingly enough, the PBIS integration strategies. So thinking about bringing existing systems together with the Cal ISP components, right? These things are not disparate, they're not incongruent with each other, but it's just about building the systems and using them together because they absolutely can be used together. All right, I'm going to move on to the quantitative side now. All right, so that was kind of the story that emerged from talking to educators, mostly pretty positive, which was pretty great. So then what we've also did, and we designed this intentionally way back when we first were writing the proposal, and I kind of threw it out there, and I somehow got this in the proposal, and it was great. I said, we've got an opportunity here. Let's do a rigorous quasi-experimental design study where we can have what would be considered SL level 2 evidence, or really, really strong rigorous evidence that would show impact on Cal ISP schools relative to schools not doing Cal ISP. And that's what this first analysis is on. Next slide, please. So as part of this work, again, we put it in the proposal, so it's been in here, we've been doing it this whole time, is we said, let's see if we can get the partner districts to share their CalPADS data with us. So we'd have the student level, complete de-identified student level data from partner districts. And the reason we wanted it from partner districts is because not all schools within all of the partner districts participated in Cal ISP, which created this perfect quasi-experimental design opportunity. So within district, we have schools doing it and schools not doing it. So what we were able to do is we were able to collect the CalPADS data, primarily just focused on behavior outcomes. So we didn't really focus on academic outcomes. We focused primarily on behavioral outcomes, but then also some demographic information at the student level from 19 school districts. They were willing to, we partnered, we established MOUs, we did secured data sharing, everything was completely compliant in that way. And we got data from 195 schools, 19 school districts, and over 211,000 students data. What we did with that data then is we created this quasi-experimental design analysis, and the analysis and approach we did was something called a difference in difference models with inverse probability treatment weights. Now, that sounds all really, really fancy. The difference in difference just means that we're kind of looking for changes from pre-Cal ISP implementation to Cal ISP implementation. That's the difference in difference. So is there a difference in the differences across time between the two treatment groups? And then the inverse probability weights is really about ensuring that any sort of potential confound on a treatment effect is kind of ruled out statistically. In other words, we've got schools with and students with all sorts of different characteristics in one group and students with all sorts of characteristics in the other, and we're just kind of statistically trying to make them the same. So each student on each side is generally the same, statistically speaking, on demographics and baseline and their kind of baseline performance. It just increases the rigor and kind of the trustworthiness of the findings by doing that approach. So in these first few analyses and models we focused in on primarily behavioral outcomes. So we had disciplinary incidents, which we call office discipline referrals. At least that's what I typically call them. And this in the CalPADS, it's disciplinary incidents, and there's lots of different kind of codes for those. But the number of times essentially someone's identified sent to the office, I always like to kind of just colloquially say. So we had total number as well as, and that was at the student level. So we did total number, and we did you ever have in that school year a disciplinary incident? We did number of in-school suspensions, number of out-of-school suspensions, and we did you have an in-school suspension? Did you have an out-of-school suspension? And we also looked at days absent from in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspension. Now, the days absent essentially is a proxy for the severity of the consequence for whatever the behavior was. And so we looked across all of those. Let's see. We included as covariates. Again, that's really to that prevent the inverse probability treatment weights. We included grade level, we included gender, their race, ethnicity, their English learner status, their disability status. We did not include their disability category because it's really, really challenging to put category in there. So I want to acknowledge there's heterogeneity in that, but did they receive IEP services or not? We did not get student level free and reduced price lunch or an economic disadvantage indicator. So instead we used the school level free and reduced price lunch indicator. We used school level enrollment. And then this is really, really just about meeting this external rigor criteria. We used prior year's English language arts achievement level at the school level as a key covariate because the What Works Clearinghouse allows you to meet their standards if you can include prior year achievement under certain conditions. It's a long story. We can talk about that later about all the nuances of what I'm really talking about there, but just know we've got that in there. Our statistical models, we did them a little differently. We did linear mixed models for the count outcomes, and instead of using, say, a Poisson model or a zero inflated Poisson model, we just log transformed them to do linear models. And then for the dichotomous outcomes where it happened or didn't happen, we use logistic mixed effects models. And by mixed effects models, what that really means is we have students nested in schools, nested in districts, and I do believe I did nested in counties. All right, next slide, please. I get really excited about this stuff, so I apologize. To increase the rigor, we did have missing data at the covariate level, not the outcome level, at the covariate level. So like missing gender, missing race, ethnicity, something like that. And so in order to have complete case analysis, we did multiple imputation, which allowed us to then include everybody within our analyses. To get those inverse probability weights, we did propensity scoring. And then we applied those to our models. Next slide, please. You want to get to the punchline, right? What you found. All right, let's go to the punchline. Here we go. Let's start with total disciplinary incidents. So this is for each student, the total number, right? So Nick, let's be honest, Nick has like 5, maybe, at least Luke probably has 1, but I've got like 5, right? So that's what I'm talking about, total number. We transformed that to be able to analyze it from within a linear model. And in the difference in difference, the coefficient of interest is called the cohort by treatment. Well, thank you, Brittany. I appreciate that. The cohort by time is our primary interest. And what we found, here we go, is this statistically significant negative treatment effect, right? So what does that mean? That means that students in Cal ISP schools saw a statistically significant reduction in their number of incidents. In other words, there were fewer, each individual student had fewer on average incidents. However, the effect size was very small, right? Negative 0.02. It's very, very small. So in other words, it's statistically significant because we have such a large sample size, very, very small standard errors, likelihood of finding significance. That's why we want to convert it to effect sizes. So we saw a difference, but it wasn't really big. So the total number of incidents was just slightly lower in Cal ISP. So good, but not too exciting. Next slide, please. So the next way we took the disciplinary incidents is, well, how about instead of how many, right? Because we know like Nick has 5 and Luke has 1, but how about just number of students that got an incident versus number of students that didn't get an incident, right? So we do a different model here. We do a logistic model, but again, we found a statistically significant negative effect with an odds ratio below 1, which means that it's less likely to happen in the treatment schools. We converted that to an effect size, and this time we found a negative medium effect size. In fact, a negative effect size, a standardized mean difference of 0.30, which is statistically interesting, but it's practically really meaningful. In education, we tend to consider any effect size, a standardized mean difference effect size of 0.25 to be really meaningful in education. This is greater than 0.25. So this is great. So you might be wondering, well, wait, why is the total number so small and having it or not having it so big? The reason is because Cal ISP, if you just like we can hypothesize, Cal ISP may not be reducing the total number of incidents for, say, your high flyers, right? So Nick is I'm always a high flyer, right? I always have tons and tons because Cal ISP is focusing predominantly on building your core, right? Your core should be kind of reducing the likelihood for the majority of students, but you're still going to have your high flyers who are going to need more intensive interventions, tier 2s and tier 3 interventions. But what this result suggests is that although you're not seeing the total number come down as much because, and it's primarily driven by your high flyers, you're having fewer students have incidents. So all those students that might have had 1, maybe 2, they're now having 0. And that's meaningful, right? You're reducing the number. Like we know that our high flyers, where certain kids are going to need more intensive interventions, but we are having an impact on most students. All right, next slide so I keep moving. Sorry, I'm taking too long. Okay, so excited. All right. Now, days missed, the same story emerges. If we look at just total days missed, we have a significant but small effect size. Why again? Because our students with the more intensive challenges needed more intensive interventions. But we are seeing a little bit of reduction, and that story really comes out in the next slide. All right, where the likelihood of it occurring is much, much lower. And the effect sizes, let's see, where's I say these are still days missed. I just go one more. I'm gonna keep moving. These are in-school suspension of days missed. Here we go. This is what I want. So even though we don't really reduce the total number of days, we do a little. It's really the likelihood that an individual student in that school gets an ISS or an OSS. So again, what we're seeing is good universal SEL culture sustaining practices, trauma-informed screening, right? Building those systems really helps a lot of students, and particularly your students that might have had 1, 2, a couple at most of these incidents. It might not be impacting the students that we need those intensive interventions, but it matters. And these effect sizes are huge, right? So this is really, really great. And I just want to shout out any Cal ISP school educators who are out here. I mean, the work that you guys did really did have an impact relative to the schools in your same district, right? Remember, the comparison schools are in the same districts, right? Which is pretty exciting. Next result, or next slide, sorry. All right, so this is kind of the summation, right? So doing Cal ISP and getting that training, when we did the rigorous analysis, we did actually find some significant and meaningful impacts, right? And that's why I always wanted to preface and start out by saying these are independent analyses, right? Like I don't go into these studies and analyses thinking, oh, of course I'm going to find these results. Usually I think the opposite, right? I work from the null hypothesis. I'm like, nah, will we find anything? But I don't know. We don't. I'm not sure. And finding these results was really, really exciting because it really reinforced that the work that the implementation team did appears to be having an impact at the student level. Next slide. All right. Now, we also did, as just an extra bonus study, right, is we said, okay, well, we're having impacts on discipline and the data we got from CalPads. I happen to have access to some California Healthy Kids Survey data. What if we looked at that outcome? So we took the student level Healthy Kids Survey data and we did the same. Actually, no, that's not true. The models are a little different because the California Healthy Kids Survey is anonymous. So you can't match one student from the prior year to the following year. So you can't do a difference in difference analysis at the student level. So we've got baseline covariates, but they're the outcomes for one school year, which was the 23-24 school year. All right. Now, I don't know how many of you out there have ever looked at California Healthy Kids Survey or ever analyzed California Healthy Kids Survey, but there's very little variance between schools. There's not a lot to change. So it's unlike oftentimes my colleague Tom Hansen, who actually oversees the California Kids Survey, he'll always say, yeah, you're really going to try to find something that changes difference? And I said, I'm gonna take a look. Interestingly enough, we did find some statistically significant differences, right? We found that students in schools, these are from students in schools doing CA-ISP after 1 year, reported slightly higher caring staff relationships, higher expectations, right? That school staff have higher expectations of them, and interestingly enough, higher parent involvement. Right? So we didn't have an impact on all of them, but we did see some slight impacts on three of them, and all three directly related from a logic model perspective to the Cal-ISP kind of approach. Next slide, please. Right? And the effect sizes are not as large here, but again, just any movement in the California Healthy Kids Survey, I think is pretty interesting and pretty meaningful and worthy of continued study. So we're also seeing not only just the impact on behavior, but some impacts on students' perceptions of their environment as well. All right, next slide. All right, so what did we find? I don't think I have to go to this too much, right? We found reductions in disciplinary incidents and then the consequences of those incidents, which is in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, right? At the student level, the likelihood of a student having any of these, there were the largest effects, with the largest effect being on out-of-school suspensions. Fewer individual students there's fewer individual students getting out-of-school suspensions in schools that were doing now Cal-ISP, right? Now, you might all be thinking there's probably lots of potential confounds on this. That's why we use the probability weights to reduce the likelihood of that. But are there potential confounds? Potentially, yes. But from a straight analysis with every possible thing we can include, we did find these results and they're quite robust. The other nice thing is they're consistent with other work we've done, particularly in California, around building PBIS and building MTSS systems, and the effect sizes align with some prior meta-analytic work that a former doc student of mine did. Next slide. All right, so what are our recommendations, right? So based on the findings and based on what Luke was talking about, what would our independent recommendations be? So we don't have as much data on fidelity. I did look at some analyses of the TFI, and there was no difference or influence of the TFI. In other words, all of the schools did pretty well in their PBIS, including comparison schools, right? So they were doing PBIS well, so which suggests that it's the Cal-ISP things that might be having or accounting for some of that difference. We think that the schools play a pretty big role. So it's about strengthening the school capacity. So if we think back to the qualitative study and kind of bringing the qualitative and quantitative together, build the school's capacity to do these on their own, particularly to build towards that sustainability. From the data side, right? I believe that one of the key components to reducing the likelihood of out-of-school suspensions, in-school suspensions, and even behavior incidents is by looking at the data, using the data to drive interventions and approaches. That's a big thing that the educators talked about, and it's true here. Continue to monitor and think about your discipline data, right? And for me, I always think it's important to conduct long-term follow-ups, right? So let's continue to follow up the data. And you can do it internally in your school. Use your data meetings to say, how did we do last year? How are we doing this year? Are we seeing kind of progress? And continuing to use that data to tell that story. Look at where you're doing. See maybe where you might need to make tweaks or think about interventions, those kind of things. Next slide, please. So what are some limitations? So any good study always has limitations. So first is it's all observational data, right? Although we're using the CalPEDS data, which is, it's the data that is reported to the state and kind of is high stakes in that way. So we feel somewhat that it's trusted, that it's reliable. We can't confirm the reliability that exactly this school had or this student in this school had exactly this many office discipline referrals because we're relying on that kind of the data directly from the schools. Um, this study was only 2 years, right? Because CalPADS data is always delayed a year. So what's exciting is we're going to get this year's data, and then we can start looking at 2-year impacts. Right? We'll be able to look at kind of more longitudinal impacts of doing this work, and that we're really, really excited about getting that data. Starting in November, working with our partner districts, getting this data and kind of continuing these analyses. Let's see here. So because there was very little difference in fidelity, we didn't model fidelity directly in there, and also because not every school we had some matching issues in regards to fidelity. So another limitation is we didn't have Cal-ISP specific fidelity, right? And so with that, some data that we still kind of are thinking about merging, thinking about like how do we measure that, how do we define that construct? So that's ongoing work to kind of start to think about more the mediating effect of fidelity on some of these outcomes. And then that last is statistical. I did transform the count variables, although it was the logistic models that actually found the results. But there are other statistical ways to kind of think about analyze that. Next slide, I'm gonna be right on time. All right, so what are my conclusions as the external evaluator and kind of what we found so far up to this point? The Cal-ISP initiative really is showing promise. Now, I don't want to stand up here and say, if you do this, it's going to solve all your problems. It's education. There's no such thing that's going to solve all of our problems. But the data suggests that doing Cal-ISP, receiving this coaching, doing these practices is at least having an impact, right? It's reducing some likelihood of out-of-school suspension, some in-school suspensions, which is really, really, I think, important and exciting work to continue to do. And we want to continue to do this work in promoting more equitable student experiences, right? So that's another piece that we still haven't fully explored analytically, but and we're excited to start thinking through about differences by different groups as well. We didn't do too much of the interaction effects yet. It's ongoing work. And that our findings, we believe, like as on the independent side, kind of underscore the value of systematic integrated approaches. Let's bring all these things together. Let's integrate SEL into our MTSS systems. Let's bring culture standard practices into our MTSS systems broadly, not just PBIS, but the whole umbrella, right? Let's bring it all together under California MTSS. Bring these things together, and we really are seeing impacts on student outcomes. And that is all I got. Luke, you're muted.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nick, for presentation and for letting me know that I was muted. I did drop a couple links in the chat, so just encourage folks to learn more about the project. And then also, if you need more information, there's a link to find your local regional technical assistance center. So thank you for the engagement. I know that Nick and I probably could not have jammed more words in an hour than we did, but there's a lot to talk about here. It was a lot of work getting this all together. And just want to call out too, so these data are going to grow. So we have, I believe, Nick, that this is year one of cohort one data. And so we're going to be adding year two to cohort one, and we'll have another cohort, of course, going through as well, which will be able to get most of their data, but not all of it, just based on timing. So more to come. Thank you for being here. Both my email and Nick's email are linked on the Cal-ISP page that I linked to there. So if you want to reach out, please do. And with that, we'll pause maybe for 1 second to see if any new questions pop up. And then we will thank you again for coming here. There was one question, Nick, about bright spots. I think referencing Stanford. I believe Stanford keeps a database of
Mm.
schools that are kind of outperforming their schools, other schools, excuse me. I don't know that there's any connections there, but if you saw that one, if you had any thoughts, I just would pause for you here.
Yeah, those are analyses we haven't done yet in regards to looking at particular, like adding those additional indicators, exemplar schools, positive, like places. I think there's what I love about research is you don't answer a question, you prompt more, and that's another one that would be really really important. But have we done it? No, not yet. And then the fidelity piece, again, it's a huge challenge. It's one we really want to integrate and continue to work on.
All right, a couple easy questions here that I can take. One is we are recording this. We will post it probably on the Cal ISP webpage. Noah, I see you asking that, but we will make sure to get it to folks. And then somebody else asked if we're taking new districts or schools. So right now, the current California Integrated Supports Project, I believe, is not recruiting any more schools, but every one of those TA centers that I linked to has this content and is capable of delivering it. And then, of course, we are looking for additional funding. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to you can reach out to me directly or to your local technical assistance center and learn more there. So the work will live on one way or the other. So just please know that was one of our commitments. And then Brittany, thank you. All right, well, we'll end there right on time. We appreciate everybody being here, and thank you for spending your hour with us.
All right, thanks everybody.